All right, we're going to take a look at doing regressions on the Nspire calculator. And so the first thing I want to do is create a new document. So I can select one. And then the type of document that I want is going to be number 4, lists and spreadsheet. So I'll go over here and press 4. And so this gives me a blank spreadsheet. Now the first thing I want to do is to label my X and Y columns. And I'm going to go up to this cell to do that. Now I could use just X and Y as label names, but because X and Y are used elsewhere on the calculator, I'm going to be slightly more creative than that and just put xval for x value. And then I'm going to go over here and put yval for the y values. Okay, and then I'm going to come down to row 1 here and start putting in my data. My x values are going to go from -3 to -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, 3. And then I'm going to go back over and scroll up back to the top, and my y values are going to be -2, 0, 0.5, 1.5, 2, 0, -2, and -1.5. Okay, so that completes entering the data. So depending on how much data you have, your list may be a lot longer, but this is the basic idea. Now, from here, you can run various statistics processes on this data to give you quick graphs and so on. I'm going to do things a little bit differently. I'm going to create graphs and regressions on other tabs, and the reason for that is because it'll generate information that's more global. In other words, other pages on the calculator can access the information, whereas that's not possible with some of the other operations that you might be familiar with. So the first thing I want to do then is to add a new page, and I'm going to add a graph page, number 2 here. Okay, and so you'll notice up here that the default is that it's going to give me a prompt for f1 of x. In other words, it's asking me for a function of x. And really what I want to do here is to make a scatter plot. So I'm going to go over to Menu and Graph Entry Edit. So we're right now in function mode, but what I really want to do is go down here to scatter plot mode. So you notice now that this is asking me for x values and y values, which is what I want. Now, I could use curly brackets and actually enter that data in there, but since I already have it in my list, I'm going to just go over here to the keypad and press var for variables. So you notice that the variables that I had defined, xval and yval, are already here. So I'm going to click on xval for the x, scroll down to y, repeat the process, put yval in here, and when I press enter, I get my scatter plot. Now you'll notice that this data seems to be kind of all over the place, but remember we have different functions that we can try to fit into this data. And if you recall, let me pull it up real quick, what we're doing in this particular case is a sinusoidal regression, a sine function which resembles this wavy looking thing right here. And so we're going to go back to this, and we're going to consider using a sinusoidal regression. So the way to do the regression then is to create another tab, Control Doc, and this time we're going to put a calculator in here. Now from here we'll go ahead and do the regression. So we're going to hit Menu. We're going to go over to number 6, Statistics, number 1, Stat Calculations, and then you can see here that it's taking giving us an entire list here of different types of regressions. If I scroll down far enough, I will find my sinusoidal regression, which is right here. So on this particular menu here, you have to be careful in which one you select. You'll be able to get a regression for just about any of these choices. The question is whether it's an appropriate model for the data that you're working with, and also whether or not you're going to get a decent fit. So in any case, we'll go ahead with the sinusoidal regression. So now it's asking for a bunch of information. X list is really asking me what are my x values. If I open the box, once again I can select my x val and my y val for y. This is telling me that it's going to save the regression equation into F1. So I'm just going to leave that there because what I want is to get that equation saved somewhere so I don't have to retype it. Okay, and then all the rest of this we can just leave this blank for our purposes. When I press OK, we got a whole bunch of stuff here on the screen. And you can see that we have a regression equation form, a model in other words, which looks like this. And so we've got A times sine of B times X plus C, and then finally plus D. And those A, B, C, and D numbers are listed down here, and those would be these numbers here. So once again, you could write this down and copy it, but we know that this is already stored in F1 because that's what we requested. So now we're going to go back over to the tab in the middle here, which is our graph, and I'm going to go ahead and plot the regression equation over this data, and hopefully we'll get a decent fit. So the first thing I need to do is to change back to function mode. Okay, now notice it's asking for F2. I saved the data in F1, so if I click my up button, it should scroll me up to F1, and you notice that all of the information is already in there. I don't have to type a thing. I just press enter now, and that is going to graph this function on top of my data. And you can see it's a fairly decent fit to the blue dots here. Okay, now what can I do with this now that I'm done? Well, depending on the type of function that you have, you may have maximum and minimum points here you can find. And you can do other analyses, and just very quickly on that, if you press menu and go to analyze graph, you can find things like minimums, maximums, intersections with other graphs if there happen to be other graphs there, zeros, where does that cross the x-axis, and so on. Just very quickly, I'll do minimum just to show you how to do that. I'm going to click there, and it's asking me for lower bound, which means I want to figure out where my minimum should be, which looks like around this little valley point right here. And the lower bound means what number below or less than this value of x is going to give me the start of a window where I can find this point. So I'm just going to click somewhere over here. Now it's asking for an upper bound, and as I sweep across here, you can see that it finds that minimum value. I can go ahead and click, and it's going to tell me that this black point right here has an x value of negative 3.49 and a y value of negative 2.05, which should be the minimum value of this graph. Okay, the other thing that I can do is to go back over to my data list here, and I'm actually going to create a list over here of y values that actually are generated from that regression equation. In other words, I came up with an equation, a formula, to tell me what the best function fit would be, and then I can use that formula to plug in any value of x over here and get the y value that it would predict. In other words, this set of data that I'm going to create here would be the same data that is plotted in black on the other graph. So I'm going to call this regression value, rval. Okay, again, not very clever, but at least something a little different. And down in this row here where the equal sign is, I'm going to go ahead and put equals, and you'll notice that it's going to say, okay, my r value is going to be equal to something. I'm going to come over here to var, click that, and you see I have a whole bunch of stuff here, but one thing I do have is F1. If I click on that, okay, this is telling me that this data is going to be generated from F1. But what am I going to feed into F1 in order to make this happen? I'm going to press var again, and I'm going to put xval. So in other words, if I take xval, these numbers here, and plug it into that equation that I generated, which is the regression equation, F1, it should give me numbers over here. When I press enter, all of the numbers are automatically generated. Okay, so what does that do for me? Well, it gives me a list of numbers here for my original x values, gives me a list of y values that would be close approximations of what I might consider to be my ideal curve. Okay, in other words, the regression curve. So you'll notice that these numbers are fairly similar, so the numbers aren't too far off, not a bad fit. I can go over to my graph, and I can have this function actually graphed over here, so I can visually see how that fits with my data and whether or not that's the appropriate function and so on. And then finally, I can look at the actual regression equation by plugging these numbers in, A, B, C, and D. And if I actually wanted to write that function down, I have a couple of options over here on the graph screen. I have it listed here. I could actually, back on the calculator screen, I could actually type in F1 parentheses X and press enter, and this is going to give me a function of X that matches F1.